This is the Brian Kilmeade Show.
Welcome to the Brian Kilmeade Show. I'm Charles Payne, filling in for my friend Brian. A lot of big news out there, and perhaps none as big as what we heard late last night in a tweet from President Trump that he was replacing his national security advisor, H.R. McMaster, who is, by the way, going to retire, and filling that job with former UN Ambassador John Bolton. It's got a lot of folks wondering about policy, wondering where we go from here. And ironically enough, you've got people from the right and the left who have voiced a lot of concerns and questions about this choice. I want to bring in our next guest who can really help us with this. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, senior fellow and military expert for defense priorities, also served as a U.S. advisor to the Second Republic of Korea Army while on active duty. Colonel Davis, welcome to the Brian Kilmeade Show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So you've got you've got the left saying it's bombs away, and even someone on the right, while not calling Ambassador Bolton a neocon, saying that he's very aggressive and very hawkish, and that could upset already unstable world. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I got to say that some of it is a bit of a head scratcher. Because when you look at what President Trump ran on, no more regime change, no more stupid wars. He specifically said, the whole Iraq war was a disaster and Bush shouldn't have done it and all this kind of stuff. And then you look at the guy he just selected, who was one of the main architects of that disastrous Iraq war and who is now advocating for outright for regime change in Iran. And, of course, he's saying that talking is stupid in North Korea and we should use military action. And now Trump is going to be going and talking. So it seems like he's on the opposite side of the president on some key things. So it seems kind of curious if that's the guy that he would reach out to come in to be his national security advisor.
By the same token, while we may not advocate for regime change per se, and I think the problem is regime change when it comes at the cost of our best and brightest young men and women. But there are certainly an authoritarian wave around the world that I think we should be concerned about, whether it's the power grab that Vladimir Putin just had. We've got the premier in China. We should call him the emperor. Xi now has effectively become an emperor. Abiy has grabbed more power. Erdogan has grabbed more power in Turkey. Is it fair to say that we need to find a way, perhaps, to make sure a really bad actor, everyone agrees, Iran, and there's beneath the surface, there's a groundswell of folks out there who want change. There are a lot of Iranians who are telling me they've got family there and that America's underestimating just how desperately they want to get from under the yoke of the sort of authorities that they deal with now. So from an intimidation factor, maybe a Bolton can work there?
Well, you make a great point, first of all, that there are all those places you just mentioned where there seems to be a move towards authoritarianism. Some of those are our NATO allies. Some of those are our competitors with in China and with Turkey, as you mentioned there. And so I think it really underscores that we can't really influence what happens there, and certainly we can't go in and requiring changes or anything else. And I think that we have to be really careful about saying, well, we don't like these guys and they are, we find them abhorrent. They don't work towards our interest, and to do something to try to unseat them or make it unstable, because we never know what's going to follow it. So far, anytime regime change has been done, it has been definitely a worsening of the situation for our own interest, which is why I think that it's the best policy for the United States and the best strategy is to, always have our military deterrent out there to make sure that our interests and our personnel and our citizens are never at risk, and anybody who even thinks about doing something knows that they're going to feel the wrath of the U.S. military. But let's don't go out searching for enemies, because we can't make it better anyway. And our main priority is to take care of the United States. And I think that we can do that without even getting into all this regime change stuff.
Yeah, particularly in the Middle East. I mean, to your point, we learned the hard way that these folks, I think what happened is a lot of these citizens were beaten down so much under the dictatorial brutality, for instance, a place like Iraq, where they don't have it. Their spirits were broken. and they just become fodder for the next strong man or strong entity, whether it's a terrorist group or some other, tribal leader or whatever. So I get where you're coming from there.
I think you're right.
But what about Iran getting the nuclear bomb? Or, if many are saying that signing this Iranian nuclear deal, in addition to all of the cash that they received, and being able to turn back on the oil spigots for the global markets, also was a de facto countdown to them ultimately getting a nuke.
Well, I actually, a friend of mine who was actually kicked out of Iran when the Shah fell and has been living in his expat here, actually just got back from Iran because he was allowed to go in because his mother passed away, and he got to go back to bury her. And, of course, I asked him as soon as he came back, what's going on? Because it was during the time with all the uprisings. And he said, sure enough, like I think you mentioned some of the people you've talked to, they said they are, sick and tired of the Mullah regime. They want to see more freedoms and all this. But he said that they don't want to see anything violent come in. So they want the support of the United States, but not intervening in there, because they really do want to do it on their own. And he thinks, and some of his other colleagues think, that if we can tacitly support but not interject, that they can do it over time, and they really want to. So I'll be real interested to see how that goes, because we don't want to get in the way of that and actually help out the mullahs by doing things, interjecting into their country, because then they'll even push back on that.
Sure.
They say, no, that's our country to deal with.
Sure. And we've also seen where the citizens may rally around them because of the imperialists making their moves. But on the nuclear weapon side, though, should we brace and accept that at some point we'll have another member of the nuke club with Iran?
No, absolutely not. And that's why I actually think, as flawed as the JPCOA is, and it's definitely got some major flaws to it, it's still better than what we had before, which was nothing. And the real question we have to ask is, if we want to get rid of that, what comes next? And so right now, there are several places. One of the flaws is that, well, there's military sites that are off limits, and we don't know what's going on over there, et cetera. But there are inspections, and there are places that are all the known places. So we have eyes on the ground with the UN inspectors right now, and so it is definitely curtailing what's going on there. If we get rid of this, we lose that, and now then they have no restraints. And if they want to go to the bomb, now then the only way we can stop them is military force. So I think that we need to keep the pressure on, and by no means accept them as going to nuclear weapons, and we should keep very close tabs. And if they actually move that way and we find evidence of that, then we should, take action, which right. The agreement allows us to do.
Speaking of keeping the pressure on, North Korea, I want your thoughts on how a new team that comprises John Bolton, Mike Pompeo changes the potential face and outcome of this proposed meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, I think that, first of all, President Trump really deserves a lot of credit for getting to this point, because no other regime or administration was able to do it. And although some say, the other administrations, and Bush, Clinton, and Obama, they all had the choice, or the chance, but they never took it. Well, I think that was a mistake, because you see the progress went all the way through, and because you didn't have the presidents intervening, in a personal way, then no chance was ever even taken. So now we're where we are. That being said, we do have, there's a risk involved, is that, we still don't want to push it too far. But I think that President Trump has all the cards in this. And if he plays it right and doesn't, try to force something before it's ready, I think he can always keep us safe with that military deterrent, because we have all the assets in the world over there. And any time North Korea ever does anything, it's almost immediate death for their regime. And I think he's communicated that very plainly. And so I think he has a chance to actually accomplish something on the diplomatic front that I think few thought that he would even have a chance to. And if he can do this, I'm telling you, if he can accomplish the resolution of this so that it's no longer a threat to the United States without having to resort to
right.
war, I mean, he literally could become, remembered in American history as one of the most amazing foreign policy people. And who would have thought that?
Yeah,
honestly,
he might even earn a Nobel Peace Prize. Imagine that, because they weren't going to give him one month into office. But
right.
But the challenge is there, though. It's difficult, and I know there was a time, where Ambassador Bolton, I think, has been on the record wanting a very aggressive, perhaps even preemptive sort of approach here. Throughout history, the folks who have gained this, the nuclear bomb, have always been able to they always had a certain amount of leadership that we just knew that they wouldn't use it. That for whatever reasons, and it wasn't necessarily always the deterrent, the counter deterrence either. With Kim Jong-un being such a wild card, do we ever risk him ever actually? Maybe he has it already, but certainly he's fine-tuning his abilities to launch an intercontinental ballistic missile and pinpoint it anywhere in the world. I mean, he can miss. He can aim for Florida and hit Georgia. It's still on a nuke. So do we allow him to have one?
I actually don't think that's the case. I recently had the honor of talking with David Kong, who's the head of the Asian studies at the USC in California, who's one of the best North Korea experts I think we have in the country. And he made the point that he said, I hear all the time that Kim Jong-un is, this wild card. He's a rogue and all this. He said he is very predictable. He absolutely wants to live, and he wants to continue dominating. And he said, we can use that to our advantage because he's not going to take action that would cause us. And he knows that we would, respond in an overwhelming way if he did use any of his weapons of mass destruction, or really any of his weapons for that matter.
But Colonel,
he says that can be used to us.
What would North Korea's currency be without nuclear technology and missile technology? What would they be able to sustain their economy on, and also have the respect? Because from what I understand, they've examined the world very closely, and Kim Jong-un, to your point, he wants to live and he wants to thrive, and he believes the difference between him and a Saddam Hussein is a nuke.
Right. That's exactly right. But again, that can be used to our advantage. And I think that when you examine all the things leading up to the Olympics, you can see that Kim Jong-un was very brash. He was firing missiles left and right and testing. He did the 2 times just last year about the nuke test and the big, alleged 100 kiloton test underground and all this. But then all of a sudden he changed when they had that November 29th launch. And I believe that's because in his mind, he now has an operational force, and now he has something to negotiate with. So I think the purpose of that is to use it as leverage to negotiate with the United States to somehow ensure his safety, because what he desperately needs, and this is one of Trump's biggest positive developments, is that he has these strong international sanctions that are just suffocating them. And the only way those come off is if Trump is satisfied that he's moving towards denuclearization. So he has to satisfy President Trump that he's doing the right thing, and he can use that leverage of his operational force to give something in order to get something. And so that's why I think that he's negotiating now, because he thinks he actually can negotiate, as opposed to being like Saddam Hussein, who has nothing in his hand if he didn't have that. And so I think, again, Trump can use that to our advantage. And
very quickly, because we're less than a minute, but I do want to ask, because you spend time in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's not getting a lot of press, but apparently America is sort of trying to negotiate a deal in Afghanistan that would include the Taliban. Are you okay with that?
If that's what the people who live with it want to do, then I'm supportive of that. As long as we can continue to ensure our own safety from any kind of terrorist activity emanating from anywhere. But if those people can figure out something on the ground and live with it, and it lowers the threat of violence for everybody, then I'm for that.
Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you very, very much. Enjoyed our conversation and your expertise, and we appreciate you coming on the Brian Kilmeade Show.
Hey, thanks a lot. Hope to come back soon. Enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Folks, we'll be right back.